I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, Lena.
Hi, Dr. Preston.
Maybe it's on my end. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. There you both are. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Destiny, thank you so much for sending that piece on surviving with class. I'm going to read it right after we're done.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I've got a few good ones in now, and I'm starting to knit them together and see what we've got. I have a couple of things for us today, but before we get started, does anybody have any questions or comments for me? I know this is sort of our last formal week together. Well, hearing your amazingly enthusiastic curiosity, I am going to press ahead. Did either one of you post yesterday about the monkey's paw?
No, I didn't really get to it yesterday.
Okay. Well, I know you were busy on the other piece, so that's okay. Yesterday Emma requested that I post some structure for the final reflection, so that's on the blog. Have you guys seen that?
Yeah.
Okay. Today, I have a treat. Do either one of you recognize the name Emily Dickinson? Oh, good.
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah.
You remember where you've heard of her?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I remember, but I think my mom told me about her one time.
Go back.
Isn't she a poet?
Yes, go back and
Yeah,
thank your
something like
mom.
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
your mom has excellent taste, if I may say. Emily Dickinson is one of America's best known and loved poets. And since yesterday, we focused on a short story as a narrative and one that built a whole lot of suspense and threw us a big curveball in a kind of a horror story way. I thought today we would shift gears completely and look at a couple poems together that Emily Dickinson wrote. They're both very short and they both deal with very different topics. So let's take a look at both. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And let's see here. All right, can you guys see that all right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the first one. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held just but ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste. And I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove, at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. First impressions, what do you notice about the poem? There's no right or wrong yet. I'm just curious what you heard and what you saw.
About death.
Okay. She makes the topic plain in the title and the first line. Did that make it easier to connect some of the imagery?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good point. What else? Did you hear that even though not every second couplet rhymed, that there was a rhythm to the number of syllables and the way that the syllables were emphasized?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we had another couple of months, I would spend a good healthy bit of it on poetry because we didn't really have a lot of a chance this year after the campus closed. And we would talk about rhyming and AB, iambic pentameter. I know that you've had some exposure to that with Shakespeare, for example. If you remember, when we studied Richard Corey, that also had a rhythm to it, yeah? But sometimes when we studied, for example, the poem by Bukowski, it didn't rhyme and the syllables didn't really have a cadence. And we call that free verse. What else did you recognize, or what else made an impression on you about this one?
It kind of reminded me of like the last few moments or before you die, or what happens when you get like near death but you don't die.
Mm,
Because she said, or rather, he passed us.
mm-hmm.
That's what I got.
Okay. Did you notice that the things that they passed were in sort of chronological order? You know, they started with the school and children,
Yeah.
and then eventually wound up before a house that seen the swelling of the ground. Um, what kind of a cornice is like a roof? What kind of cornice would be in the ground? Can you think of a place that a person resides that's in the ground and the top of it looks like a
A
monument?
coffin?
Yeah, like a headstone or,
A grave?
yeah. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, before we move on to the second poem, let's talk about Death himself. I said himself. Well, that's kind of a weird thing. Death is a concept, it's an event, but it's not a dude who shows up in a carriage. So, what literary technique does Dickinson use here to give us the sense that death is a character and not just a concept?
I think most of the time death would mean like the Grim Reaper, or just like something like a sign knowing that you're going to die or something like that.
Okay. So, those are familiar symbols. You're right. Do you remember us talking when we were still in class about anthropomorphizing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so most people think of this as personification, but that's different. That's a different concept. Anthropomorphizing is what happens when, I'm going to let Deanna in here, that's why I stopped sharing the screen, is when you give a non human idea a human character. So in this poem, and like you would see in examples that feature the Grim Reaper, Lena, Emily Dickinson gives death this whole character. He shows up in a carriage and takes her for a ride. So what we have here is anthropomorphizing death, but we also have an extended metaphor. She doesn't just use this in one passage, she carries it through the entire poem. And hi, Deanna.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I had Spanish.
No problem. So today, just to catch you up, we're talking about Emily Dickinson. We're looking at two short poems. And the first one, Because I Could Not Stop for Death, we just read and discussed a little bit. And I'll come back to that before the end of the call. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll also tell you what I'll do. I'll put the link in the chat, and that way you can have a look while we go on to the second poem.
Okay.
So the second poem is a poem called Dr. Preston Misplaced It, but Dr. Preston will find it, I hope. It's called Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Sounds like a rather random idea. And here again, last I checked, hope was a concept, not a thing. And if it was a thing, it didn't have feathers. So let's talk about this ever so short but very well-known poem. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. So if in the first poem, the extended metaphor Oh, now I see this tricky website. It keeps moving on even though I don't want it to. So here's what I'm going to do, tricky website. I'm going to copy and paste this whole poem. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to put it in the chat. So there. But as you look at that now, what's the extended metaphor here? What is she comparing hope with?
Through a bird?
Yeah. Why do you think she would do that? Why not an alligator or an orangutan or an armadillo? I could go on.
Because isn't birds like, oh, like a dove, like kind of related to like, what is it, peace or like something like that?
Yeah, you're right, Deanna. Doves are often symbols of peace. In this case, I think you're also on the right track. What is it about birds? I mean, I think we can discount like emus and ostriches and chickens from this conversation, but what is it about a songbird or a bird in flight that we might connect with hope?
Is it like freedom kind of like, because like they're free to like fly wherever they want to?
Yeah. And, you know, a couple times during the quarantine, I'll show you a little bit of the view outside my window here. I'm surrounded by oak trees. And every once in a while, we'll hear the most cheerful, melodic, happy tune of a bird. And I don't know what they are. And I don't know. Every once in a while, it's kind of fun to connect the actual bird who's making the call with the sound because I can't tell. But it's impossible to be in a lousy mood when this little thing chirps. And that kind of gives you a sense of how Emily Dickinson is looking at hope. When she writes, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Obviously, if you've got birds in your soul, you know, you've got sort of issues. But metaphorically, it makes perfect sense because hope isn't a thing that resides out there, right? So we can have different symbols of hope. We can have different ideas about hope, but ultimately hope is something that's within us, no matter what else is going on in the world. So here's where, here's where I'm going to make connections to our lives right now. In the same way that yesterday we talked about be careful what you wish for because you might get it. Today's moral of the story is no matter what else is going on around in the world, Emily Dickinson is suggesting that this is something that resides in us and never stops at all, suggests that it's there whenever we choose to access it. Now, she says it so gently, so much more gently than I just did, which I think is beautiful and way more effective. Because if you guys know how frustrating it is, imagine the last time you or somebody you know broke up with somebody and somebody else came along and said, oh man, you're a great person. There's other fish in the sea. Uh-huh. That doesn't really work in that moment, does it?
No, not really.
Okay, well, it's worth asking the question, why not?
It's because it's so blunt, so vague. There's like no emotion in it.
Yeah, and in that moment, it's quite likely that the person needs to grieve and just be with those feelings and get left alone without a problem being solved, right?
Yeah.
Dickinson's sharp. She doesn't do that. And she's not really writing at somebody who's going through something. She is characterizing hope as this thing that's just there. And it's sweetest in the gale. Why? Because when you think about it, that's when we need hope the most. And sore must be the storm that could have bashed a little bird. I mean, you've got to really like have something horrifyingly bad happen to give up hope. And this last part, I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea. So she's saying that she can access hope even in dire circumstances. Yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Why do you think she chose to end the poem with that couplet? What does that mean to you?
Wait, what does extremity mean again?
Extremity, it means under extreme duress or extreme stress. If you're an extremist, you're suffering. But even if the bird was suffering, even if the bird was in dire straits, it never asked a crumb of me. What does that suggest about hope?
It never depends on anything else.
Or like hope
Yeah.
comes within you, not on someone else.
Yeah, say that again, Deanna.
Like hope comes from within yourself, not depending on someone else.
Okay. And let me ask you this. I'm going to point this question to Destiny because I know you're an athlete. If you're in a wrestling tournament, a lot's being demanded of you, yeah?
Yeah,
I mean, if you don't show up and give it your all, you're going to pay a price.
definitely.
Would you say that that's Dickinson's idea about hope here?
No, I think what she was trying to say was more just that even though the Bird of Hope has sung its song and then like in the darkest times or whatever, it still never asked for a crumb of payment. Like it came free in a way.
Yeah. You don't have to do anything except listen for that little bird. If you're available to it, it's there. And that's why in that first stanza, she said it never stops at all. We are our own best enemies when it comes to barriers to hope. And nobody wants to hear that. But it's really good news when you think about it from Dickinson's perspective, because if I'm my own best barrier to hope and I just decide, you know what, today I'm going to have some hope. Nanner. I get to. If Dickinson's right. Now, there's something else that these poems actually have in common. And we talked about the anthropomorphization of death, and we talked about the representation of hope with the extended metaphor of the bird. Does anyone remember the idea of taking an abstract concept and giving it a form and a shape so that people can understand it? Like if I'm wanting to symbolize having ideas, I might use a light bulb over a character's head or an emoji for just about everything in way of emotion. What's the name for doing that? It's a tough one, and it's been a long time, so I'll let you off the hook. It's called reification, which my keyboard doesn't like. So I'm going to try this again. So when we reify something, we take an abstract idea. Could be like love or death or hope, and we create a symbol for it. So for love, it might be a heart, right? That people can understand easily without a whole lot of explanation. I'm getting some weird feedback. Do I sound normal to you guys?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep this short then. So for today's post, what I'm going to ask you to think about is how we take abstract ideas and create meaningful symbols to which people can relate. So if I say the word happy, you all kind of get what I mean. But if I have to explain the concept of happy, it's going to be really hard and take a lot of words. Right? Okay. So without further ado, since my computer is making me sound like a weirdo to me and everybody else, I'm going to cut this short unless people have any questions. Does anyone have any parting shots before we break? Okay.
Nope.
Deanna, since you came late, if there's anything that I can clear up for you later on after you listen, let me know. Just send me an email. And otherwise, have a great day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Thanks, you too.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Bye.